Well, good morning, Flag Church. How are we doing today? Doing good? Doing good. It is a great day. We're glad that you're here. If you're joining us online, we're glad that you're here. And if you've got 3 seats, or you have 2 seats next to you, throw your hand up real quick. We got some people looking for seats. You got 2 seats together. Throw your hand up real quick. All right, all right. Hey, we're excited about this series that we're in. I'm excited we got water baptism set up today. First service, there weren't water baptisms. This service, we have 4 water baptisms at the end of service. So if you like it when I speak slow, that ain't happening today. That ain't happening today. In this series, we've been talking about our vision, about how we exist to build vertical and horizontal relationships. And we also talked about how the technology always works better when you turn it on. There we go. Exist to build vertical and horizontal relationships. And when we think about the words of Jesus, when he talked about the great commandment that we should love God with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength, also loving our neighbor as ourselves. So it goes both ways on that. Not just the vertical, but also the horizontal. That's the great commandment. The great commission was that we're supposed to do that, loving God, loving our neighbor in the whole world. So whether that's Pittsburgh, Fort Scott, whether that's across the nation, whether that's across the world by supporting missionaries, however and wherever that looks, we need to share that Christ came, because Christ came to set people not just free from their sin, but forgive them from the penalty of their sin, and that's the last great. We have the great commandment that Jesus gave us. We have the great commission, but we also have the great context, that the context doesn't begin with your birthday, which for me is 9/24. No, that's Connor's birthday. 9/28, 66. Yeah, my birthday, yeah. I got Connor's birthday in my head. But it starts when he created the worlds. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the context ends when we stand before God, because it's destined for man to die once and then to face judgment. And because people are going to face judgment, we need to make sure that they're ready. We need to make sure that we're ready. We need to make sure that our hearts are set. There's not a single person you've met today, I don't care if they gave you cappuccino, if they helped you park your car, if they took your parking spot before you could get it. They're going to be in eternity. That's why the person was giving you cappuccino. Because you're made in the image of God, you're going to be in eternity, and Christ's love compels us to do that. That was part of our message last week. That's why they were out there helping park your car. Bob Boys is out there with his big safari hat on going, Mark, you didn't tell me it was going to be hot today. I go, Bob, it'll be cooler in the 11:30 service, trust me. It'll be cooler then. But so in this series, that's what we've been looking at and focusing on in this series called Icon. Basic idea of taking a symbol that's got deep meaning. And we asked last week about the idea of search. What are you searching for? What is your why? What is your why? And who knows what your why is? That's obviously a rhetorical question. God knows what your why is. Had someone write out a prayer card this past week. We were going to put it up on the screen, but didn't want to give their identity away by their handwriting. But they basically wrote, hey, please pray for me, I have cancer, period. But pray more so that I find out my why. What can you do if a church is filled with people that are more concerned about pleasing God than extending their life? Jesus was more concerned about pleasing God than extending his life. It's amazing. There's no limit to what God can do. And what is our why? Our why. Why do we do what we do? Christ's love compels us to. Christ's love. What was Jesus' why? This is all from last week. What was Jesus' why? To seek and save the lost. Therefore, if you're coming in here, if you're new, if you're not part of us, if you haven't had a chance to get on board and go along, if you're not connected to Christ, we exist for you. That's why we're here. That's why we're here. If you're already part of us, let's go reach people. If you're part of the church doesn't exist for you. We are the church. We exist for the world. And that's the direction that we're going, and that's who we're trying to reach. And this week, the icon we're looking at is the idea of refresh. Refresh. To bring back up. You ever have a web page up and you got to hit the refresh button to see the latest news? What's new? What's the update? Let's get it refreshed. But we have this idea in Scripture as well of a refresh. If you've ever tried reading your Bible all the way through, you've probably started at Genesis, which is a difficult book to get through after you get past the first 11 chapters. But you got Genesis, and there's Exodus, and there's Leviticus, and there's Numbers, and then there's this book called Deuteronomy. What a weird word, Deuteronomy. What it really means is to tell again. What does Deuteronomy mean? To tell again. Because if you read Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, you read some stuff, and then you get to Deuteronomy, and they say the same stuff. Like the exact same stinking stories. Like, wait a second, I read that. Really? Did he have to die again? Did he die twice? To tell again, because they wanted to refresh in their hearts and minds what God did. And then you get to the prophets, and you got the story about Nehemiah, a builder, literally a construction builder, a leader, who got burdened by a vision to go ahead and see God's walls put back up around Jerusalem. So he goes there, he gathers people, he's a great leader, he casts vision to people, and they start building the wall. And about 30 days in, 29 to be exact, they kind of get off track because vision drifts. Vision leaks. Vision has ADD. Vision doesn't stay focused. And after about 29 days, he refreshes the vision and reminds them why we are here, what we are doing. This is what we are doing. That is not what we are doing. That is not what we're this is what we are doing. And he refreshes the vision. You go to the New Testament, and you see the Apostle Paul writing from a jail to the church in Philippi. And in chapter 3, he writes, hey, to write the same things again to you, which means he must have written them a letter previous to that, to write the same things again to you, it's no trouble for me. And it's a safeguard for you. It's a safeguard. So there may be a little bit today that when we go through a refresh and we share about our story in the church, you might be going, oh, I knew that, I knew that, I knew that. I'll guarantee you, and I'll show you literally that many people in the room don't. As a matter of fact, you'll realize that as we get farther along. I'm missing a slide. No, I'm not missing a slide. I'm good. So pull your bulletins out if you would, if you're someone that wants to take notes. If not, just pull them out and make a paper airplane if you like. If you're watching online, notes are available. But my one question for you is this. What is in your life since Flag? What is in your life since you've started attending here? Now, for some of you, you've been attending here 15 and a half minutes, so it might be a hard question to answer. And we're not trying to say Flag's more important than God, because some of you met God before you ever came here. You've been connected to God for years before you ever showed up here. God had already saved you and forgiven your sin, and you were following him like crazy. When you moved to town, then you got connected here. But what has God done in your life since you've come here? You got a little box on your bulletin. What would you write in that box? What has God done since you've started attending here? What do you now have that you didn't before? What can you see that you couldn't see before? Hope? Future? Peace? What has happened? What if we never existed when you showed up here? What if you showed up on a Sunday and the Sunday before we had a business meeting and said, yeah, we're tired of this. Let's just sell it all, pay off the debt, and let's give the rest of it to missions. Woohoo! And we'll go find a church somewhere else. And some of you are going, crud, this is the first church I've connected to in a decade. I don't want to go find another church. What has God done in you since you've started attending here? If you don't have the courage to write it in, and we're not asking you to scan it in and post it anywhere, what would you put in the box? And maybe it wouldn't fit in the box. But if you can see something now that you couldn't see before, if you have a good view, it's because you're standing on somebody else's shoulders. Someone who went before you. Someone who's gone before you and given you a spot where you can stand. Have you ever walked up a trail and you get to the top of the trail and you go, man, this trail is nice. Someone cut the trail for you. Somebody cut that trail. And so as we look at that, I want to ask you to participate with me in an exercise. This is not Zumba. You will not sweat. You will not, unfortunately, burn any calories either. Please stand with me. Please stand with me. Please figure out how long you've been attending this church. For some of you, that will be very easy. It's 17 minutes now. But figure out how long you've been attending the church. No one's going to be asked to cry or hold hands or anything. If you've been attending the church for 1 month or less, please be seated. 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. 6 months or less, please be seated. 1 year or less, please be seated. 2 years or less, please be seated. Is that nuts or what? 3 years or less, please be seated. You know, we showed you last week that 53%, according to a survey in February that we did, 53% of the church have been attending 3 years or less. Now you got proof, huh? Now you got proof. The commitments that you make, the sacrifices that you make, the people that we do things for that aren't here yet. If you're seated, you weren't here yet. And that's why we did what we did, because you weren't here yet. If you started attending in 2015, please be seated. 2014, please be seated. If you started attending after we moved into this facility, please be seated. If the first Sunday you showed up, you were in this facility, please be seated. Okay. Take a look around. The people that are standing right now, one, are going to get their picture taken even though they don't want me to. But they can whine about it later. But if they're standing right now, that means they heard me say again and again and again, we are not raising money for a building for ourselves. We're raising it for everyone that's not here yet. You know who everyone not here yet is? If you're seated, it's you. And they're the ones that sacrificed for you, even if they hadn't met you, even if they didn't know you, even if you hadn't even decided to go to Pitt State yet. You were challenged to sacrifice. If you started attending in 2012, please be seated. 2011. 2010. And if you're not sure, you can stay standing. That's up to you. But at that time, in 2010, this pastor got in their face and said, hey, we're out of space. We're going to raise money for 3 years above your tithe so that we can build a facility for people that aren't here yet. And it's not for you. We're not doing it so we can go back to 2 services and get comfortable. We're doing it to reach people that aren't here yet. Will you give? And amazingly, they didn't say, out of here, see you, pastor, bye-bye, nice knowing you. No. I don't know if they gave, but my guess is if they're still here, they probably did. Or they wouldn't have had buy-in, they would have jetted a long time ago. We owe them a tremendous debt of gratitude. You may not be seated yet, but can we give them a round of applause and honor? If you started coming in 2009, please be seated. 2008, please be seated. 2007, please be seated. At that time, we said, hey, let's have 3 services instead of 2. And they all thought, yeah, let's schedule our pastor's funeral. Yeah! Still here, still standing. If you started coming in 2006, please be seated. 2005, 2004, please be seated. That's when we went to 2 services. And that was tough for some of us. Most of us had never attended a church with 2 services. I had never participated in a church with multiple services. We had to make some changes that were challenging and difficult. Some of us were on the board at that time and serving. But you didn't leave, and you could have. You could have. 2004. If you started attending in 2003, please be seated. 2002, please be seated. That's when we broke ground, because all we had here was empty 2 acres. And we put shovels in the dirt, crazily so. If you started attending in 2001, please be seated. If you started attending if you started attending after the Layman's got here, please be seated. Yep. And if you started attending in 2000, please be seated. If you started attending in 99, please be seated. 98, please be seated. Were you guys here when they bought land? 97, they bought land in 98. All right. That's when they bought land. We'll share that story a little bit more in a few moments. If you came in 97, please be seated. 96, 95, 94, 93. I knew that. Yeah. No, you weren't told to be seated yet, Marilyn. Michelle. Day 1, October 1993. And I'll show you where they met for day 1 in a few moments. Can we show honor and appreciation? Until you know somebody's story, you don't know what makes them tick, you don't know why they do what they do, and chances are if you don't know their story, it confuses you as to why they do what they do. But once you get to know their story, it makes a little bit more sense. Once you get to know our story, it'll make a little bit more sense why we are not satisfied with the size of the church. Not because it's too small, but because there's still people that haven't heard, that aren't reached, that aren't connected to a local body. Not because we need to be bigger than another church. But until there's one person left within a 20-mile radius that doesn't need Christ, we ain't done. We ain't done. There's still fish to catch. As soon as the ocean is empty, we're good. Let's sit back and relax, but that hasn't happened yet. So since vision leaks, our story is tied to vision. So the main scripture today, and in other days I'll give you large portions of scripture. Today we're talking the story and the vision, the same way Deuteronomy did, because Deuteronomy didn't really quote anything, just told you the story. Proverbs 29:18, where there's no vision, people get lost. People get perished. A contemporary translation might say, where there is no GPS, people are always recalculating. Where there's no revelation, people cast off restraint. Where there is no vision, vision drifts. Vision leaks. So what we need is a fixed landmark so that vision can be connected to something. Some of those fixed landmarks are in the past, but we're not going to live in the past. But we're not going to forget the past, because the past is our fuel for the future that has a distinct landmark that we are chasing, and we are building vertical and horizontal relationships. As we shared with you last week, 53% of the church, meaning the adults in this room and teens, have not been coming for more than 3 years, so they have not heard this part of the story. So let's tie it to an idea of courageous leadership. Number 1 on your notes. Courageous leadership challenges what is for the sake of what could be and should be. And in 1993, and that's actually your fill in the blank, 1993, it's numbers. Won't that be easy to write down? Yeah. They started with nothing. Nothing but a commitment and a willingness to go forward, and this is where they met. How many of you have been in the basement of Memorial Auditorium? Hands up. You've been in the basement. How many of you know where B1 is down there? Yeah. Think B as in boiler room. It's in the corner. It's used as a green room sometimes, not because it's fancy, but because it's really far out of the way. It's all they could afford to rent. It wasn't until they took the commitment to step out that some provision came in from the Assembly of God churches in Kansas to help raise funds, as well as until they stepped out, that provision came in from the teenagers across Kansas that gave our church their first sound system. If you go to Pizza with the Pastor today, the speakers from that first sound system are still over in our Connect Center, still being used. And now we're the church that gets to bless those other churches at times. Their first pastor had boldness and courageous leadership to be here. That's Max and Patty Phipps, and they have agreed, as long as their schedule doesn't come up anything awkward, to come to the homecoming that we'll be having in October. They'll be here. They're the pastors that had the courage to go ahead and say, hey, we've only got this many people, but let's buy land. It's a gutsy move. Real gutsy move. I was talking with Marilyn. Marilyn was one of the ones that was standing at the very end this past week, and she mentioned what she remembers from those early days is moving from location to location to location to different location. And if you have been married more than 10 years and you've married young, you know what it's like to have different houses the first couple years of your marriage. And in 1998, they purchased the land that you were literally sitting on. 2 acres. 2 acres. So I asked Marilyn, was this ready, aim, fire? Or was this ready, fire, aim? It was definitely ready, fire, now let's aim. Because her words were, crazy idea, a step of faith. Because if the church couldn't come up with the $19,000 in 6 months, the people that had to pay it were the ones that signed it for the church. They were going to be accountable for it. That's the kind of faith that it took for them to move forward. Yeah, $19,000 in 6 months, that's not a big deal. Let's look at the attendance. Well, there's the paperwork of the land purchase when they paid $19,000 for the land we're sitting on. Not the 4 acres, not everything else we've added. Just those there. The church owned nothing but vision. Would you rather attend a church that owns nothing but vision or a church that owns everything but vision? If you attend the church that owns nothing but vision, warning, they're going to challenge you to fund and sacrifice for the vision. If you attend the church that has everything but vision, you won't be challenged to do anything and you won't even want to show up. Because you'll get tired of showing up because there won't be any reason to. So they raised $19,000 in 6 months from 32 people. That's the actual attendance numbers that were handed to me when I showed up in 2000. Out of those 32 people, you think any of them were like kids? I don't know about your kid when he was 10, but my kid wasn't walking around with a bunch of money. I did the math, so you won't have to. That's $593 per person. In 2018 dollars, that's $917 per person. If we did that in the next 6 months, we would raise $458,000. That's how much faith they took. That's how much of a sacrifice they made. Are you challenging what is in your life for what could and should be? They did. We benefited, and your box shows it. Your box shows it, our benefit. In 2000, they took a step in a new direction and were willing to get an extremely good-looking pastor's wife and pastor on site. And a really cute kid. My goodness, what happened to him? Man, he's really cute. Now he's just handsome. Did you see what it did there? All right, good. You know, it's the first time most of them had a pastor younger than they were. If you're under the age of 30, that doesn't mean anything to you, but tell me when you're 40 and you go to your doctor and he's younger than you, if that matters to you. Can I get an amen from those over 40? They stretched in salary. The church said, we're going to stretch in salary. We're going to give our new pastor 20% more than we were giving our previous pastor. And they did. And Mark and Sarah stretched, and they took a 60% pay cut to receive not the $250 a week, but the $300 a week. That's what we came on. So question, is that faith or foolishness? It's rhetorical. Don't shout out an answer, please. And the application's coming. Did the church step out in faith, or was that foolish of the church? Because there was a month there that we had less than $1,000 of income, and we still had $820 a month rent to pay. I got a 1.5-year-old at that time. Was that faith on my part, or that was foolishness? Well, it worked out. It must have been faith. That's bad theology. And thinking that it looks successful, therefore it must be God. That's bad theology. That means that someone who might not have success, that means they're dishonoring God, and that's not accurate at all. Does he challenge you to operate in faith, or does it look like foolishness? Is there anything possible he could challenge you to act by faith that won't somehow have a hint of foolishness in it? At least someone's going to call it foolish. You got to be careful with that. So we had to innovate. You know what innovate means? Innovate means y'all ain't got no money, but you got a ton of passion. And so we innovated. And here's an actual picture from our very first outreach. Walmart had a sale on Scotch tape and white paper. And that is a highly technological digital screenshot from a VHS recording off of an on-air broadcast. We didn't wait till we had what we needed. We didn't wait till we had what we wanted. We just went out and did it. How are you managing the tension in your life between faith and foolishness? If your Christianity is boring, you're doing it wrong. How are you balancing faith and foolishness? If it has any tinge of foolishness, you just run away from it and say, wisdom, wisdom, I'm operating in wisdom, when in reality what you're doing is scared to death of faith. You and I are thankful for the faith/foolishness of those who are before us. Who will be thankful in the future for your faith? Not your belief. Who will be thankful in the future for the actions you took on what you believed, which is called faith? Next, courageous leadership takes people places they've never been before. And there's me leading a groundbreaking service, and I'd never really attended a groundbreaking service before. The first building we basically built ourselves, meaning the volunteers of the church as well as multiple teams from other Assembly of God churches, including a missionary that came for 11 months and brought his RV here, and he and his wife lived in town. The only thing we hired out was plumbing and the crane work. Who in the congregation had built a church before? Just about nobody. Who had been part of a church before when it was being built? Just about nobody. Did the new pastor have construction knowledge? Pastor Mark, you got your tool belt on backwards? All right, let me change it. Cool. Pastor Mark, you got your tool belt on backwards? That's what they did on me. That's truth. That's truth. And we didn't stop anyways. And we knew that once we launched out, once we broke ground, how much we were going to have to spend, and then our payment was going to go from $820 a month rent to about $2,200 for a mortgage. So who was attending? Again, actual numbers, full disclosure. 60 people were attending on average for the 6 months prior to groundbreaking. 44 of those are adults. 44. And for those of you that were there, you know that about a quarter of those 44 were college students. Passion, energy, strong backs, empty wallets. Empty wallets. Did it anyway. We launched anyways. Faith or foolishness? It worked! Did that make it faith? So we had a moving day. And a couple months later, we had a dedication day. As a pastor, I get the privilege and difficulty of being around people when they're dying. Most people don't get to define how they die. You get to define how you're going to live. Are you playing offense or defense? The goal of life is not to arrive safely at death. We're not supposed to exist until we exit. What are you doing with your Christianity? You playing offense or are you playing defense? There's almost nowhere in the scriptures, especially in the New Testament, we see anything about playing defense with our faith. If we're going to go ahead and have an active faith, and then we're going to have courageous leadership, it means we're also going to seize and not just see opportunities. We're going to seize and not just seize opportunities. Yeah, I got the wrong C up there, don't I? That should be C and not seize. So in 2004, the church was full. And you know who loves a full church jammed out to the gills? Pastors, that's it. That's the only people that love a full church, pastors. You know, the church is full. Yeah, it's awesome, it's awesome. Do you want to sit with no space? No. You want at least one seat between you. See, you like that. One seat, one seat. Isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? A little one seat, a little bit of a cushion there. It's great. So pastors love a full church, but we were full. Setting up extra chairs every week. That's awesome. Unless you're the person coming in late. That's the guest. So we got to do something. Either we do nothing and we lose harvest, or we do something, which means changing services, changing this, changing our structure of a traditional Sunday school, changing a lot that's going to break some hearts and probably cost some harvest too. But we had to do something. And you take the opportunity of a lifetime during the lifetime of the opportunity. Translation. If you want to lock her up for the rest of your life, put a ring on it! You take the opportunity of a lifetime during the lifetime of the opportunity, and we did. And you can tell Anthony was not on staff right now. He's on sabbatical right now, but he wasn't on staff at that time because our graphics are horrible. That means I did it. That means I did it. And so we did. We went to 2 services. And then we added full-time pastoral staff. And most everyone in the church had never attended a church that had another paid pastor. Why do we need 2 paid pastors? That's like having 2 wives. No, it's not really. Not at all. Not at all. Besides, don't have 2 wives. It's not a good thing. Most of the people had never been part of that. We've never done that before. Cannot be part of our vocabulary. As soon as we've never done that before, it's part of our vocabulary. Just call the church cemetery, schedule a burial, and depending how much money and how many people this church has, it may be 20 years, but that's where we're headed. You can't operate off of it. You don't see that in the New Testament. So in 2007, we did something that we've never done before. Went to 3 services. There's a picture from 2011 of what it looked like. I can tell you exactly where I was. I was in the Kansas City Royals parking lot at Kauffman Stadium. I got there early for a game with Connor, and I call our superintendent and say, hey, Terry, we're getting ready to go ahead and go to 3 services, and we're thinking 8:30, 10, 11:30. What do you know about those times? What other churches in Kansas do we have doing 3 services? What do you suggest for the times? Cricket. We didn't have another church that was doing 3 services out of 140. If you're not going somewhere you've never been, you really need a leader, do you? And in 2010, we started the capital campaign of 3 years of giving. Now, Flag had never had a real capital giving campaign. Mark had never led a real capital giving campaign. Mark had never participated or given money toward a real capital campaign in his life. We did it anyway. That picture is actually from our groundbreaking, and you're literally sitting on that grass. Literally. And those are the people that said, all right, we'll stick around. We'll keep giving. We'll keep serving. And so we took an entire offering that day, went to that, and we just kept moving forward. And this congregation made faith promises to give $300,000 over 3 years above their tithe. Above their tithe. They didn't give $300,000 a year in those 3 years. They gave $310,000 those 3 years. You know who they gave it for? People who weren't here yet. Probably you. Probably you. Refusing to be paralyzed by fear. So as I looked over each of these steps, and each one of these steps of faith that we took was a launching point for us to jump forward, these are the 4 simple things I jotted down. They're not in your notes. You don't have to write them down, but they're vision-driven. Great commission, great commandment, great context. That's why we're doing it. It took faith because there was definitely some worry and concern. It might not work. If you have a guarantee it's going to work, you don't need God. There's a chance it might not work. Now you might be operating in the realm of faith. It's going to be others focused. It was about those who weren't here yet. But here's the crazy thing, an expected sacrifice. There was not one of those steps that wasn't going to cost us, make it difficult on us, or move forward. So the challenge is, if you're taking up a seat today, are you willing to go ahead and sacrifice in the future for someone that's not here yet? Because that's where we're going. And it's going to cost you. Do you want to be part of that? If you do, let's go. If you don't, this may not be the church for you. Because I am 51. I do not want to be 61 and still pastoring 500 people in Pittsburgh, Kansas. That is not what God's called me to do for the next 10 years of my life. If you are right here, 10 years later, you do not need to be right here. God is moving. God is challenging you. God is stirring you. And yes, it might look scary. Yes, it might be difficult. But could you imagine if we spent all the money we spend in a year just to collect and to pay payroll and to pay the building and pay the mortgage and buy the cappuccino? And at the end of the year, we have nothing to show for it, no increase in the kingdom. We're called to spread his kingdom. So question for you. If you had to do it all over again, whether you're in your 20s or whether you're old like me and you're in your 50s, be thankful, 70-year-olds. I just made you feel good. If you had to do it all over again, if you had to go back to 1993 and decide, do we want to try and start a brand new church, or would it just be easier to go somewhere that's got it all together? They don't have any vision, but everything's paid for. If we go back to 98 and we bought land, if we go back to 2002 and we break ground and build the building ourselves with a pastor that doesn't know which end of the hammer to use. If you had to do it all over again. If you had to go back to 2010 when the pastor's saying, hey, we want you to sacrifice financially for 3 years, and he's going first, but everyone's going to sacrifice financially for 3 years. Will you stick around? If you had to do it all over again, what would you do all over again? What would you do? Say, yes, I'd do that again. Yes, I would. If you had to do it all over again, what would you do all over again? Because let me tell you something I know about you, because I know this about me. You have no idea what can happen when you take a step of courageous faith. You have no idea. You have no concept that when you tell God yes, what he's getting ready to do. Stand with me, would you?